Hello and welcome to Dungeons and Drama Nerds. My name is Todd, and today I'm here with Percy.
Hello.
And Nick.
Hello.
And our special guest, Mac Rogers.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Today we wanted to discuss the lines between theater and audio drama, and who better to discuss that with than writer of the plays the Honeycomb Trilogy, Universal Robots, as well as the audio dramas Steal the Stars, The Message, Give Me Away, and many more. So to start it off with, Mac, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your trajectory as a writer?
Definitely, yeah. So I come from theater. When I got out of college, I moved to New York. Soon after I moved to New York, I started a theater company with two close friends of mine from college, Sean Williams and Jordana Williams. She was Jordana Davis at the time, but between college and when they got to New York, they actually became a couple and got married. They when they moved to New York, we decided to start a theater company together because, you know, they had worked with me on plays that I wrote back in college, back at UNC Chapel Hill. And we basically sort of did all the stuff that like dumbasses do with when you get together with some college friends and make a theater company where you put on some plays and you're shocked that nobody comes to see them. The first play we did was a play that I wrote called Dirty Juanita that was like that was about sort of like a sort of a strange deteriorating relationship between two straight male roommates who'd moved to New York from college, as you can roll Hall of Mirrors here. And it was it was unbelievably long. It was packed with direct address monologues. Sean and I both acted in it, and there was another character as well. And we put all of our money together. We rented 4 weeks. We rented 4 weeks at a theater that we found because we thought, well, we need to have a long enough run, you know, for word to get around,
build a press. Yeah.
You know, so the Times and the Post and the New York Press that still existed, you know, all those people would come to see the show. So what that actually meant was like we had about 50 friends in New York between college and some other stuff. And those 50 friends kind of scattered over the first couple of performances. And then we played to just basically nearly empty houses for the remainder 4 weeks. Like there'd be like a couple people in the audience. And it was, I always tell people, there's just no playwriting school on earth that will educate you like performing your own play with direct address monologues directly into the eyes of the two people who are the only people who showed up to your show, and you're boring them to death with your incredibly overlong autobiographical play about your life that nobody else cares about. It was a harrowing, humiliating experience. And I had a lot of time after we closed to sit and think about what I learned. A big revelation that occurred to me as I started to get back into, you know, producing shorter plays as part of like short play festivals, getting involved in like different, you know, organizations is sort of like a way of getting, you know, me and my colleagues getting back on our feet. Probably the most one of the key revelations of my writing life was that I would not have gone to see the play that I wrote. I thought it was incredibly important for other people to come and see it because it was a 3-hour play about my emotions. But it occurred to me, I never go to anybody else's 3-hour play about their emotions. So why did I think anyone would come to mine? And I started thinking, well, what do I go to see? I go to see science fiction, and I go to see horror, and I go to see thrillers, and things along those lines. And so I started to think, because I still wanted to make theater, I started to think, can those genres, which are typically associated with film and television, could those genres work on stage, given what you might call the limitations of the stage, but which are also, from another vantage point, the opportunities of the stage. And once I started really applying myself to figuring out how to tell the kinds of genre stories that I loved via theatrical styles, I started enjoying playwriting much more. The play still stayed personal. That's the thing. I would tell younger people, you don't have to worry about making the thing you're writing personal. That'll just be there because you're the person writing it. Think of something that you would enjoy writing, and your life will leak into it no matter what. And so I started writing, science fiction, horror, thrillers. I started enjoying the writing so much more. My colleagues, as a result, enjoyed producing the material so much more, and audiences, as a natural outgrowth of that, enjoyed watching it so much more. And we started to, over the next 10 years, we started building an audience, more and more leading up to the Honeycomb Trilogy, which you mentioned earlier, which was really sort of the zenith accomplishment among me and my colleagues in theater, which was this trilogy of plays about an extraterrestrial occupation of the Earth. There were reasons why all three plays were in the same living room set. The living room just changed what it meant over the course of the two generations that the storytelling spanned. And we mounted those plays sequentially in 2012, January, March, and June. And they got mostly great reviews. A lot of people really enjoyed them, and it sort of emboldened us to remount them in 2015, where we actually went to the gym at Judson. The Judson Church is sort of one of the storied locations of indie theater, because that was a big enough space to where we could mount the plays in repertory, where we could store the pieces of the set that we weren't using for the other two plays, and we could do epic Saturday and Sunday 3-play runs where people would have the option of watching the entire trilogy in a single day. And all three of those plays got New York Times Critics Picks. We got that 2015 was really the zenith of our theater accomplishment. Sean and I joked that doing the Honeycomb Trilogy plays in 2015 in repertory was sort of like our big touchdown in senior year of high school. We were the star quarterbacks, or the star. I don't know what the football positions are, but we did the amazing touchdown. We were absolute heroes in our high school for the remaining couple weeks of the school year, and then summer came and nobody cared anymore. And we're just sort of like, but do y'all remember when you loved us? Do you remember when you were cheering for us? And, we're at the bar telling the bartender about that touchdown we had, because it was really just like audiences loved it. We great crowds. It was just a wonderful, magical experience. We did a remount of my play Universal Robots the next year, but it was quickly becoming clear that as an independent theater company where we had to load in our own sets and we had to do equity showcase contracts, meaning that everyone was getting, less than minimum wage to be in the shows, it became clear that we were just getting too old. It was wasn't a sustainable lifestyle for us. I don't know what would have happened, but by pure chance, our college friend and my colleague Dan Coyce, who works at Slate. Slate had at that time an affiliated podcast company called Panoply. Panoply's closed down now, but at the time they were basically producing Slate's podcasts. They were looking for collaborations to bring revenue in, and they somehow got connected with GE, General Electric. GE was like, we want to make a fiction podcast. This was 2015, so there were far fewer of them at this time, but not none. And they said, we're looking for someone to basically write Serial with aliens. They wanted a fiction podcast that sounded like a investigative documentary about an extraterrestrial transmission that was being decoded that came to Earth at the end of World War II and was now being decoded in the present day. My friend Dan Coyce, who worked there, said, my friend Mac just wrote this serialized science fiction play. He knows how to write serialized stuff with cliffhangers, mainly because I grew up on Doctor Who. And so I was able to go in, an interview for the job, and then by pure chance, because who knows if I would have gotten it. I think I was going to be up against some pretty serious people. All of a sudden, GE, for some reason, needed to move up production. I think by 6 weeks. They wanted to release it 6 weeks earlier, and I happened to be there. I happened to be the guy who was right there, who said I could start right now, which is one of those things where everyone says, oh, the way you get in to get paid gigs is it's always some weird story that you don't know how to tell other people how to replicate. I just happened to be able to say I can start right now in a panicky situation when suddenly the whole thing had to happen faster. So that came out shortly after we did the Honeycomb Trilogy, again, the remount in 2015. And so by weird chance, I was able to segue almost effortlessly, almost not straight into audio right around the point that me and my colleagues were realizing that we were burning out on theater, at least on theater on the elaborate scale that we produced it at. So I wrote this show for Panoply that ended up being called The Message. It was very much in the school of the show, of the fiction podcasts that were popular at that time. Indeed, it was some of the stuff they told me to listen to. They said, oh, if you get an idea, you should listen to the Bright Sessions. You should listen to the Black Tapes podcast. You should listen to Lime Down. I mean, the total pass go and get $200 fiction podcasts.
Yeah.
So I was like, I was like, I never dreamed that one day I'd get to like actually meet those people. They were all like mythical. It blew my mind. Like a couple of years later, like I'm meeting Lauren Shipp and I'm meeting Paul Bay because they were like, they were just sort of legends in my mind. So I sort of went straight into that. That was a big hit. I'm very proud of the script. I think the script had something to do with it, but I'm not unaware that GE had an ocean of marketing money to spend on that show. They were placing ads in insane. They had an ad on Mark Maron. So like they had bottomless money, way more than almost any fiction podcast would ever have. But whatever the case, they were happy enough with it to bring me back a year later to write another show for them. Both of these were branded podcasts that I didn't have to mention GE in them. In fact, they told me not to, but they said that I needed that some piece of innovative technology that they were working on, one of the new groundbreaking things they were working on. They needed it to be described in the story, and they needed it to play a role in saving the day at the climax of the story. But other than that, I was left very free to write the stories as I saw fit. Particularly the second one. After the first one, The Message was successful. They brought me back the next year for a show called Life After, about a social media platform where messages from the deceased start popping up. They gave me a very free hand in how I developed and wrote that story. And as long as the tech, I mentioned the tech in like episode 2 and episode 6, and then in episode 10, it was somehow involved in saving the day. So like, I don't know if anybody would ever do branded podcasting like that ever again. I don't know what the current state of branded podcasting is, but to my great surprise, both of those shows, I later found out that both of those shows were optioned by big Hollywood companies for development for film or television. Neither of them was ever made. And in fact, for The Message, I got a direct phone call from a big Hollywood company, and they said, "Can we option The Message?" I was like, "Oh God, I've been waiting for this call all my life, and I have to send you to General Electric because they own it." Nobody screwed me. I knew that from the beginning. So I went back to my friend Sean and I said, "Could we do this? And could we own our own stuff?" And he said, "Yeah." He worked in audio production before he did theater. So that's how Gideon Media was born. And that's how I started self-producing fiction podcasts.
That's awesome. That's like, what a wonderful story, both from the theater side and your segue into audio drama and podcasting. I had no idea, and I've known you for a couple of years now. So like, that's so cool. And thank you for sharing all of that.
Pleasure. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned within that starting to sort of like shift from confessional direct address, play about my feelings, to writing in genres like horror and sci-fi. And I'm curious about what specifically maybe interests you in telling stories that have that sort of speculative fiction edge to them, aside from like affinity for the genres themselves.
Yeah, that's funny, isn't it? Because, when I think back to like why I started, I mean, obviously a lot of kids think spaceships and lasers are cool. Doctor Who was foundationally huge for me because I think my parents always, when we would come home from school, they'd have us watch public television. I think my parents didn't like they didn't tell us that there were no other channels, but they just didn't tell us about the other channels. Of course, we eventually found out about them from friends at school and stuff like that. But we sort of just thought, okay, you turn on the TV and public TV comes on. So when you come home from school, you watch Sesame Street, you watch Mr. Rogers, you watch The Electric Company or 3-2-1 Contact or whatever these shows are. A lot of them don't exist anymore, but obviously Sesame Street does. And obviously people have heard of Mr. Rogers still nowadays. But one day I stayed up after those shows to see what came on at the achingly late hour for a little kid of 5:30 p.m. And then Doctor Who came on. And I think, and I've remained a Doctor Who fan for my entire life. I think that it's interesting because Doctor Who can inculcate in you an affinity for more than just science fiction. Science fiction is obviously the preeminent thing. You watch Doctor Who, you get seriously into time travel and aliens and stuff like that. But it's soft sci-fi to the point that it also gives you an affinity for fantasy because there is a certain level of kind of just like tech indistinguishable from magic type stuff. There is not an Asimov, The Expanse type feel to it. And then also, very crucially, Doctor Who does give you an affinity for horror because quite often the monsters would be quite scary, especially if you're a little kid. The old classic show, very often the monsters will be quite cheap, but they would be quite frightening to you if you had a credulous imagination. The monsters would be quite frightening. I think one of the showrunners of the 21st century version of the show said, Stephen Moffat had said, Doctor Who doesn't take place in outer space. It takes place under your bed. It's a show about scary monsters. So it scares you for a few minutes and then in swoops the Doctor as a fundamentally reassuring force. There's a writer I know, El Sandover, who said that children's literature, children's entertainment, I'm totally paraphrasing, but it's like it's the deployment of carefully measured out doses of trauma that you can handle as a child, just the right amount that you can handle. What appears to be grandmother turning out to be a wolf, but then something reassuring coming in, so that the first time that you actually experience frightening or traumatic stuff, it won't be the first time you've had those emotions. It's a preparatory thing. But I would say that, in a sense, Doctor Who sort of inculcated me with a love of kind of like the boundless possibilities of fantasy, the moral dilemmas of science fiction, and then sort of like the existential kind of like hopelessness, forces bigger than you of horror. And I've been compelled by those things all my life. I mean, when I talk to people who hate horror and they tell me why they don't consume it in any form, the feeling that they describe not liking is the same feeling I like. It's not that I feel something different than they do when they watch horror. I feel the same thing they do, but or listen to horror or something like that. But I want that feeling. The opening music to the Magnus Archives scares me to the marrow of my bones. But I also, for some reason, I love the feeling. And I think in all three cases, I think there's a lot to be said for the spoonful of sugar making the medicine go down. All three of those, the science fiction, fantasy, horror, they all have like lots of fun stuff to kind of make adult themes kind of go down more easily. I think horror, because of like if you have a bunch of cool cathartic scares in it, I think that's a way of dealing with the fact that we quite often feel really very helpless against sort of nebulous forces. I think nowadays more than ever, I think that we sort of feel like we're constantly hearing about oncoming apocalypse in various forms, and horror is sort of a way of processing that. And science fiction, for me, often is a way of digging into complex moral dilemmas and definitions around the nature of what humanity is. But it goes down a lot smoother than some sort of like, dry symposium on those subjects, because, you can have lasers, or you can or alien invasions or something like that. Something that kind of adds an element of exhilaration and possibility to, what can be sort of heady or intellectual type stuff. I was talking to a friend about Star Trek: The Next Generation about a year ago, and we were sort of remembering how so many of the episodes, especially in the middle of every season, they sort of have the dog fights at the beginning and the end, or the Borg invasions or whatever. But a lot of the episodes in the middle could almost have been plays. They were nearly always like there'd be some dilemma that was mostly sorted out by conversations. The legendary episode where Data's creator shows up and wants to claim him back as if he's a piece of property rather than a sentient being. Not a single punch is thrown, not a single phaser is fired in that episode. It's all done by moral dilemmas, nearly all of which could be staged as a play, which I think is what made me start thinking that like plays could be a legitimate venue for science fiction. Dialogue can feel like action. Dialogue can feel like breaking. So a big part of it was like finding ways to make conversations have the breathless feeling of exhilaration that you would get from like a chase on movies and TV. And the way that you do that is to steadily build the menace and tension in a conversation alongside with gradually ratcheting up the complexity of the ideas being discussed. The discussion of intellectual ideas can actually be quite exciting if you keep finding new complications to throw in and you marry those ideas to a sense of gradually ratcheting up menace. Audio drama in many ways feels like a cousin art form to theater because it rewards lengthy dialogue conversations in a way that film or TV quite often don't seem to. And I think maybe I had an easier segue into audio drama, radio drama, whatever you want to call it, podcast drama, because of how much those forms kind of welcome, dialogue and conversation as part of their dramatic engine.
You were talking a little bit about this, but I'm wondering if you can expound on it more. Do you think that there are stories that you can tell better in audio formats than you can in the theater, or vice versa? Or like, what are things that you think about when you're writing? Like I think of like Steal the Stars. I don't think that could be just a play. I think that would be a very complicated play to produce, but I know that there's a lot of audio plays that I listen to, and it's like, yeah, this is like 5 people talking around a fire. That could be a unit set. I see it. Like, I get it. And not that everything needs a unit set, but like when you're writing are there things that you're like, oh, I want to do this in an audio play because I know I can? Like, I know I can push in this direction?
Yeah, I think I had a bit of a rocky transition into audio because I think I was still wearing my theater cap in a lot of ways with the message because I was writing it with that. Very often with theater, my instinct was to write for very few locations, or ideally one location. I was a big fan of the unit set, partly because I was self-producing independent theater plays with my friends. We didn't have flies. So if you wanted a change of scenery, the lights would have to go out and a couple of your buddies would have to like drag stuff on and off stage in darkness. And it's absolutely deadly and everyone can hear them run into each other and say, ow. So I generally found that like, as much as you would think a play might become static if it was on a single set, it actually could be much more exciting because you just like figure out what variations you can play with that space. And like what sort of like suspense and menace you can bring to that space. So I had in my head the idea, a single location is much cheaper and easier to manage. And so as a result, the message takes place almost entirely within the offices of this code breaking company that is contracted to decode this extraterrestrial message. And when I was first designing Life After the following year, nearly all of it was set in FBI offices, because again, it was and somebody I had left out of my sort of earlier Max Life spiel, who I really shouldn't have, is the audio director John Dryden, who is a wonderful director of radio drama in the UK. His company Goldhawk makes a number of dramas for different outlets of the BBC, and he's also made work for various podcast companies in the US. Anyway, they brought him over to direct the second show that I made for Panoply called Life After. And John gave like a heavy amount of notes on my scripts that had to do with ways of making them a better fit for audio. And one thing he hit really hard was all of these are set in indoor offices. Every single scene is set in an indoor office. He said, it would make it so much better if you could, give me a variety of locations. I think the way that he put it was like giving the audience the same room tone in every single scene is like if you couldn't turn over to the other side when you're sleeping. It's like giving them the exact same feeling on their eardrums the whole way through. And so I sort of had to reverse engineer Life After to kind of think of a lot of reasons, because it was all told from the point of view of a single character, this guy Ross. I had conceived Life After to be along the lines of thrillers I love, like No Way Out with Kevin Costner or Out of Time with Denzel Washington, where someone within a law enforcement organization needs to do illegal stuff for some reason. They've got some kind of force, and so they're having to like use their own access to certain stuff to pull off some illegal shit while their colleagues are getting more and more suspicious of them. I've always found those kind of stories really gripping. But John was like, no, he said, can you get me outside sometimes? Can you get me into apartments? Can you get me, so I can't start coming up with all these reasons the character would be walking along the water, or why the character would be back in his apartment, why he'd be on a New York City street with, horns honking, stuff like that. And I had to do some reverse engineering to my original outline with Life After in order to accommodate that note of John's. But what I knew after that in writing subsequent shows was to build those multiple locations into the outline before a single page of dialogue was written. And I found that actually that was tremendously freeing. And I came to love the feeling of being able to just jump to a totally different place. You had this feeling also, it's like, I don't want to overtax the sound designer. I don't want to overtax them. I don't want to give them too much. And I come to figure out now, sound designers don't want their fingers to be worked to the bone, obviously, but sound designers do kind of want to do a bunch of stuff. They want to have a good time. They want to design a bunch of environments. They want to, they want to have some fun. They want to, they'd rather not. They're the ones who have to listen to every single scene 5 billion times. They'd rather not have everything in the. So I started, really stretching my legs and I can suddenly have these people on an airplane. I can suddenly have these people overlooking a cliff. I can suddenly have them, parasailing. I haven't done a parasailing scene yet, but I could because you could do it in audio, and you could do it in audio so much easier than you can do it on film and television. So I have definitely grown to love the great freedom of being to jump around in locations, and I've grown to love the ability to achieve more complex effects with sound design, to the point where I've become much less sheepish of putting demands on a sound designer. At Gideon Media, we have a regular we've been working with, a very talented guy named Bart Fassbender, and I do ask him. I mean, as a courtesy, I do see sound designers on Twitter sometimes talking about how other creatives sometimes push them too hard or overstretch them, and I try to be mindful of that. So I do send Bart early drafts, and I say, please tell me if I'm asking for the impossible here. And he hasn't said that. Sometimes he'll say, if you do this or this, I think I could get a better effect here or whatever. And I'm always it's so much easier to just tweak a couple of things on the page than it is to massively revise a sound effect. I do definitely revel in that sort of thing. And by the time of writing Give Me Away, the most recent audio drama that my company released, of asking for some really complex sound effects involving a virtual cyber prison where the voices of a number of extraterrestrial political prisoners are being held captive. Like I started writing asking for some really complex things to be realized with that Bart came through with. So now at this point, with new audio scripts, I am always thinking about what's the unique soundscape thing that we could potentially achieve with this? What's something we could give people that they haven't heard before? A way to use this form of storytelling and its unique advantages in that way. Yes.
Yeah, this is also making me think of, specifically tying this to the genre interests you mentioned earlier. It's also so much. Because audio drama lives so much in the audience's imagination, it's also like, oh yes, we can have a monster or whatever appear in an audio drama in some ways much more easily than in theater or film, because if I know slightly Gabriel Urbina, who is one of the creators of Wolf 359. I remember him saying one time, he comes from a film background, and he said, oh, I needed a plant monster, and in audio drama, all you need for that is some leaves and branches and like a room in which to make some Foley sound effects, and then you get the actors to scream, and like that's a plant monster. So yeah, it opens up a lot of space to play.
Well, and it's also so much more frightening. Like, I think so much of horror movies is like not showing the thing because it's always so much worse in your mind. And like in audio dramas, you just get to live there. Like it's both cheaper and easier, and also like more affect, because no one's like, oh, that's not what I thought Swamp Thing would look like or whatever.
One of the key things I discovered in the process of like figuring out how to write from audio is sort of like a jarring transition from theater in some ways. A lot. Obviously, there's obvious differences between the forms, but but part of it was just a mindset switch. And in terms of what you both are citing, a huge sort of unlocking for me was realizing that one of the core things you're doing with audio drama is you're partnering with the audience's imagination. You don't want to over-describe and you don't want to under-describe. What you want to do is give them just enough to autofill. You give them just enough that like between a combination of like what the characters are describing and what the sound effects are suggesting to let them think of the most awful plant monster inside their minds. You just want to give them a little push. You want to give them a little start, and then their minds will fill in a way scarier plant monster than you could ever visually render. And that's always one of the key calibrations page by page with an audio script for me, is like, have I hit the sweet spot of description? Like to the point where like, enough to where the listener can take it and run with it, but not so much that people feel bogged down. That's the thing we always joke about is like, if a character, if there's only two characters in a scene and one of them pulls a gun on the other, how do you make the listener know that a gun has been pulled? Because nobody ever says, you just pulled a gun on me. And I've been joking with other audio creators for years about various lines of dialogue that, a Colt 45, how gauche, or something like that. You have to say, you have to come up with something to let the audience know what's happening, but just enough so they can picture, but not so much that the characters start sounding ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's like the audio version of the one-sided telephone call in theater. Yeah, exactly. Because we've all seen hack plays. What do you mean they never received the paperwork for my loan? Yeah, exactly. You don't want to. You want to figure out how to make sure they know the paperwork for the loan wasn't received without the character having to say that. Police,
in audio,
you're
doing it constantly. At the beginning of every scene in audio, every single scene, you're trying to figure out how to situate the audience without the character saying some like incredibly stultifying, pedantic thing about, well, now that we're in this meadow, like at the beginning of every scene, I feel that inward groan starting of going, okay, what's a slick, non-eye rolly way of establishing where we are?
Mm-hmm.
So.
I'm curious, we're recording this in March 2022, and over the last few years, we've seen so many, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen so many theater artists transitioning into audio in some cases. I've heard so many more audio versions of like plays originally written for theater than I ever expected to 2 years ago, and film and other like digital media, live streaming as well. And I'm curious, do you feel like the landscape of audio dramas has changed in the last couple of years as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, well, obviously, I mean, the pandemic in a lot of cases seems like it accelerated trends that were kind of already happening. Like the people I talk about, people seem more and more inclined to stay home rather than go out. People are more and more, getting their entertainment via their screens, their interactions virtually. And I definitely, the fiction podcast world was already starting to explode before, the pandemic came along. The funny thing with the pandemic was it left audio as one of the few things you could produce for a while, but it sort of like kneecapped it in the sense that it cut massively down on listenership. That we lost our number one venue, which is people who are commuting. And so there was like more output than ever, but like more supply, but less demand, which was, sort of a discouraging situation. But definitely the biggest thing I noticed is just the explosion of of stuff being made, which overall is a good thing. But I definitely, for me and my colleagues, it's definitely caused struggles for us when we launched our audio slate last year with Gideon Media working for the first time by ourselves. There was no deep-pocketed partner. There was no GE. There was no Tor McMillan that we co-produced Steal the Stars with. We were out on our own, marketing our shows with our own resources. And I think we thought that would be easier. I think we could say, oh, it's the writer of The Message and Life After. It's the company that produced Steal the Stars. We've got a name in this business. We could go out and people will remember us and they'll come back. And boy, that was not the case. Some people did. We definitely had, a core group of listeners who, have followed along with our stuff and are interested to hear what we're doing next. But we weren't pulling the audiences of that same size, of the size of Steal the Stars, the millions of downloads that Steal the Stars got, or that Life After got, or that The Message got, partly because we didn't have the marketing reach of the co-producers that we had on those shows, but partly also, why did we think people remembered us? Memories are short, and the audio drama world is just exploding. There's constantly new shows. The fact that we took a couple years to produce our new slate, we kind of vanished from people's radars. If we'd put out a show maybe the next year after Steal the Stars, maybe things would have gone differently. But we spent a couple of years making stuff for private clients and raising money to make our shows. And not getting back out there fast, that really turned out to be a mistake, because we didn't have to start from scratch, but we definitely had to get in line. Sure. I think we thought that there was going to be some velvet rope that we were going to be allowed to just cut straight up to because we'd made popular shows in the past. But the vast number of new shows, people fell in love with new stuff. People, quite understandably, people fell in love with the shows that were putting out stuff regularly. I know it's been said over and over again, nothing beats regular output. Nothing beats not losing touch with your audience. It was a hard lesson to learn, and one we're definitely going to bear in mind going forward. But it's however tough of a pill to swallow it was for us personally, it's unquestionably a good thing for the form when huge numbers of shows are being made. Obviously, not all of the shows are going to be good, but what it does mean is lots of stuff is being tried. I do love that the American audio drama form has almost completely moved on from the faux investigation format for a long time. I mean, I don't have anything against it. What I just didn't like was that being everything. I didn't like that being it'd be like if every single show on TV was The Office or Parks and Rec with a camera crew that was assumed to be there. Nobody would put up with that. But there was this weird stretch where if a big company, if you were pitching an audio fiction thing to them, they'd be like, okay, so what's the found footage aspect to it? You're like found footage. I'm just going to be an audio drama. It's just going to be, which in the UK people would understand very easily because that art form never went away. But people have definitely seemed to have have moved way past that. The found footage thing still exists, but it's a subgenre as it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be everything. And, there's lots of just wonderfully interesting stuff being made. The downside, of course, is that as any form gets more popular, there's always going to be a certain extent of star-driven stuff suddenly starts taking all the top spots. And that's definitely a factor that we've seen. I'm not opposed to star-driven audio dramas in any way. I've just found it a bit discouraging that there hasn't always been the level. Some of them are excellent, but there hasn't been the level of quality control that you would necessarily expect from some of those. Which can be a discouraging thing because very often an audio drama with a big name star in it is going to be the first one a newbie is going to try, the first one that someone is brand new to the field. And the problem is that audio drama isn't popular enough in the United States for people to think, oh, if I don't like this one, I'll just try another one. No one thinks if they watch a bad movie or a bad TV show, oh, I'm giving up on film, I'm giving up on TV, I'll never watch another one. But we're still in that precarious stage with audio drama where if someone hears one and it stinks, they go like, oh, so this is just this crappy little art form. This is bad. All these are bad. So I definitely have this feeling like I so want everybody to hear a good one. Cause when I started with podcast, I mean, I'd heard audio dramas before podcast. I heard Doctor Who, Big Finish dramas. And I grew up, my parents let us listen to The Shadow and Inner Sanctum, classic, golden age stuff when I was a kid. But my intro to podcast drama was Bright Sessions, Black Tapes, and Limetown. And I was enthralled and thrilled by those shows. And it made me want to hear tons more stuff. And I want people who are just discovering the form to be hearing some equivalent of Black Tapes, Bright Sessions, Limetown, something that makes them fall in love with it. Which is the only reason why I sometimes wish that the quality floor was a little higher with star-driven podcasts, but that's become a big new part of the landscape is that famous people want to do them. I think partly I think a lot of stuff was recorded during the pandemic, and people thought maybe that was the only way they'd be able to act. But I think in a lot of cases, famous people just want to do them now because the form is exhilarating, and also you can look like crap and not learn your lines, which must be like such a relief if you've been doing on-camera acting for a long time. The other danger to watch out with that, though, is that a lot of times people think, oh, I can't get anyone to buy my film idea or my TV show idea. I'll convert that into audio and make it as an audio. It's not that never works. It's just that that's a really bad idea that's a bad method of coming up with an audio drama idea. It helps a lot if you come up with an idea that was meant for audio. It's audio dramas aren't films with the pictures taken away. The storytelling is very much thought of for audio. And I'd love the form to have its own unique dignity along those lines.
Awesome. I'm just jumping back to your found footage thought. And my boyfriend, who does not listen to our podcast, is still certain it is Serial, but for tabletop games in some way, and only 8 episodes long. So I hear you. And there are many people who feel that way.
Well, now I think that's what we should be. We can solve tabletop game crime, Todd. We're missing a huge marketing opportunity.
That's
any way
you
could make this. Any way you could somehow turn this into true crime. I wish I knew a way to turn my stuff into true crime.
GM Crimes will get found audio from people's streams. It'll be great.
I will do a crime.
Back to you, Mac. I really, really loved Give Me Away. I listened to it
thank you very much.
This winter, and it was really delightful. And I just wanted to know and talk to you about what inspired this story of ghost houses and alien contact and radical hospitality, which was a phrase I saw someone employ for the piece, which I don't think I would have used myself, but I was like, oh yeah, that is what it's about.
It's funny. We had a bunch of ideas me and my colleagues at Gideon Media, we keep a running document of pitches and ideas that we have. And Give Me Away had kind of been hanging around for a while. I'd sometimes used it in the past as like, it was originally an idea for a play, which was going to just be the night that the main character Graham, the night before he is about to have a secondary extraterrestrial consciousness put inside his mind, and and he's spending his last night just as a solo human being in this hotel room with his wife and their best friend, and phone calls coming in from his kids, and the drama was going to be about waiting for dawn when he was going to go do this. And then at a certain point, they revealed that they've come there to talk him out of it. And it builds to like a crisis point. Episode 4 of the 9-part first season of Give Me Away has several strong traces of that play in it. I did keep the idea of his wife and their mutual best friend coming to visit him in the Nevada desert location of much of the story. But beyond that, I heavily reconceptualized it when it became an audio drama. I heavily reworked it into being a multi-location story, and particularly with an ear toward what can make this a unique audio phenomenon, which is when I settled on the idea of the screaming spaceship. I wanted there to be some version of some audio way of telling the story of the main character, Graham Shapiro's emerging conscience. I wanted the screams that emitted from this kind of nondescript spaceship that landed in the Nevada desert to change their meaning for him throughout the course of the first episode. The first episode basically follows this guy, Graham Shapiro. He's adrift in life. He and his wife, Morgan, have just gotten divorced. Both of his children are grown. All of these sort of institutions of his life, he can tell he's kind of winding down at work. They're not going to fire him, but they kind of need him less. And so all of the structures that he's invested in his life are kind of like fading into the background, and he kind of doesn't know what he's for anymore. And he just tries all the stuff that like a divorced guy tries, book club, casual dating, various things. But at the same time, the spaceship has landed and it's being investigated by the government and scientists. And you keep hearing, news reports about what's going on with it. And you hear the screams that are emanating from the spaceship. And I wanted it to be a situation where the first time he hears the screams, it's like, oh my God, gross. That's alien spaceship has screams coming out of it. And then gradually for that to morph into a morbid fascination. Man, those screams are scary. I wonder what's going on there. To gradually going to a point where Graham was like, those screams are people and they're screaming for help. And I can't just stand by and listen to it. I have to go be a part of it. And that all had to do with, we really wanted to produce a multi-season audio drama. Everything that Gideon Media had done before and that I had done before had all been conceived as a mini-series. The Message in Life After, definitive mini-series. They both had strong, hard conclusions. With Steal the Stars, I assumed it would only be one season. I left the plot open for there to be a second season, but I made sure that it had a complete character arc where if we didn't get to ever make any more, I would be completely happy with where it ended. I mean, like within that universe, things are still happening, but the main character, Dakota Prentice, she has come to the end of a complex emotional arc. If nothing else happens with Steal the Stars, and I don't know if it ever will, I'm happy with where it landed. With Give Me Away, we took sort of the bigger risk of saying, let's make this season 1. You never know with independent audio drama if you're ever going to get to make a season 2. But we took the risk of ending the season on a point where we'll actually be pretty bummed if there's not any more of the story. My whole life has been plays or miniseries, definitive endpoints. And so in order for me to think about what a story without a definitive endpoint would look like, I needed to think of the kind of story that seemed like it could grow and expand rather than sort of like pushing towards like a definitive point of collision, which is how I've always designed stories. So I was like, what if this new way of interacting with something strange, they discover the only way that they can get the screaming imprisoned alien consciousnesses on that ship out is to download them one at a time into a human body, which they would then share with that human for the rest of the human being's life. Was like, oh, there's all kinds of ways that story can expand. Number one, the government's only letting in a few volunteers at a time, and those volunteers have to be heavily screened. There's a lot of ways that allows the story to expand. Right now, there's not nearly enough human volunteers to get all the people off the prison mainframe. So that allows in future seasons new characters to come in, new human characters to show up as volunteers, new alien characters to come out of the cyber prison and into people's minds. So the story can expand naturally that way. It can also expand location-wise as the government gradually relaxes the restrictions. I always thought season 1, everyone has to stay in the Nevada location. Season 2, they could get furloughs out to visit their loved ones. Season 3, they start letting people actually go, and this whole dual hybrid mind people start melding in with American society. And how does that change American society? And this main character, Graham Shapiro, I always thought he would be one of those leads who was like McNulty on The Wire, or the main woman Piper on Orange is the New Black, or one of those main characters who's like an audience's way in, and then you quickly turn it into an ensemble show where they're just one of the ensemble. So in future seasons, I see Graham as being central and crucial to the show, but I hope if we get to make more of it, that it will spiral out into being more of an ensemble show where we keep meeting new human volunteers and we keep meeting new extraterrestrials coming out of the prison.
Awesome.
I will also be very bummed if we don't get to find out what happens next.
I'm very hopeful. It's one of those things you all know how in indie audio drama, it's such an, I mean, everyone's like, when's the next, I see this happen on Reddit with other shows, and people are like, when's your next season coming out? People and audio creators have to be like, guys, folks, we're not TV. Like we don't definitely have the budget for season 2 yet. When maybe we never will. And also we don't have like a huge multivalent production staff, that we can only make so if we're working on some other audio, we have to finish that before we can make season 2 or season 3 or whatever. It's just not the indie audio drama is just not the same world as when's the next season of Stranger Things or something like that. I sort of see that dynamic playing out all the time. Give me the ways the first time I'm experiencing it as a creator, which is like there's all these factors delaying Give Me Away season 2. We're trying to make a few other original shows right now. We just don't have the bandwidth right now to make multiple audio dramas. We would definitely love it if Gideon Media expanded to the point where we were like a bigger shop and we were making multiple shows at the same time. But we're not there yet. We don't have the revenue coming in yet to make that possible. And so we really can just do one thing at a time. And if we have a client job, if we have a private client job, corporate client job, or we're just working on a different show, we can't make, the next thing happen. People have asked us about a second season of Steal the Stars for a while, and a lot of the creative people involved in the first season would like to do it, but there's all these factors that keep pushing it back if it'll ever happen. And it makes me feel bad because I know how much I want to see the next season of things that, or hear the next season of stuff that I like. But I've come to, with audio drama, I've trained myself to just be like, who knows when it'll get here?
This is a little bit of a theater connection circling background. But one of the other things that you all at Gideon Media have done that I found really interesting is last summer you produced audio adaptations of 2 Wallace Shawn plays. You specifically Grasses of a Thousand Colors and The Designated Mourner, which are 2 phenomenal plays. And I was just curious what led to that. I guess what led to that collaboration, and also what was involved in that shift from kind of plays that are quite established and have been around and had their own reputation as great theatrical works for a while. What led you all to want to put those into audio?
I mean, it was an astonishing coincidence. I have venerated Wallace Shawn's plays since when I first discovered them in late undergrad. I found The Designated Mourner, I think, in the grad school library, and immediately fell in love with it. Started backfilling, like finding his earlier plays. It was, I mean, I had the usual kind of like disorienting realization that the incredibly adorable actor from Princess Bride and Clueless wrote these incredibly harsh, bleak, sexually explicit plays that I thought captured so much of a sense of the modern subconscious, and that they were really quite some of them are really quite prescient in certain ways, so I'd loved them for years. My friends, it was a joke. My friends were like, "Oh, Mac's big hero is Wallace Shawn." I would go to see his plays when they came out. I mean, Sean Williams, my co-producer, Gideon Media, he came to love a lot of the plays as well. And by pure coincidence, Gideon Media and me as a writer personally are repped at the agency CAA, and Wally is repped there as an actor. When he decided he wanted to make podcasts out of The Designated Mourner and Grasses of a Thousand Colors, he wasn't sure how to go about it. He just simply contacted his acting reps at CAA and said, "Can you all help me with this?" They routed him to the podcast people at CAA, who our agent there, Josh Lindgren, reached out to us and said, "Are you all familiar? You probably know him from The Princess Bride, but are you familiar that he also writes scripts?" And we're like, "Yeah, we know that he writes scripts." We were flipping out, and I think that was a big part of the reason that he ended up deciding to work with us, despite the fact that he almost certainly could have gotten those shows produced with a much larger company. Is I think that he felt safe with us because right off the bat we told him we already loved the material, we wouldn't change anything about the material, that we were going to sort of present, especially a play with like Grasses of a Thousand Colors. That's a hard swallow, I guess, for a lot of people, like to present a play like that. To sort of, I can imagine a lot of other places would be like, "Oh God, could you at least take out the scene with this or that or whatever?" We were just like, "No, we 100% believe in this." The only creative participation I had in those scripts was Wally did let me participate a little bit in picking out where the cliffhangers fell. That didn't involve changing a word, and I wouldn't change a word. It's the Holy Bible to me, but it was one of those things where it's like, if you end part 3 here, that's a bit of an ominous feeling, because these plays weren't written with any kind of Wally does not have pulpy instincts the way I do. My storytelling is really driven by a hard pulp sensibility. I really want to get the audience go, "Ha ha, bam! I bet you want to hear the next episode now, right?" Wally does not think that way. He with his playwriting, he really just likes to tap into the subconscious, tap into his political concerns, and basically just follow his muse. He doesn't care about cliffhangers, but if you look closely at his scripts, particularly The Designated Mourner, there are cliffhangers there. So I was able to at least be part of the conversation with that, which was, a great honor. But it was a remarkable experience to be recording those in the summer of 2020. We had to do it all over Zoom, of course, because the pandemic was in full swing. Basically every actor in both plays is over 70. Nobody was going to be going to a studio. And we had to do the whole thing over Zoom. And it was wild to be recording The Designated Mourner while there was a play about great political upheaval in a society, while there was great political upheaval on the streets of America, and to be recording a play like Grasses of a Thousand Colors, where the entire world is crippled by an illness, while obviously, being at the height of the pandemic. There was this amazing feeling of the fact that Wally almost seems tapped, like there's something in his subconscious that's just tapped right into America's id, or the modern world's id, or whatever. There's these like, he just, the prescience of the plays was just really remarkable. And it just felt like really raw, like just peeling a scab while we were recording those shows. It was wild because everybody, we did the whole thing over Zoom. We had to mail good quality microphones to some of the actors who didn't have them. Everybody was sort of learning how to do Zoom as we went along. I remember our first meeting with Andre Gregory, the legendary director of these plays, who was the legendary co-star of My Dinner with Andre, with Wally. The first time we had a Zoom meeting, Sean and I got there to the Zoom meeting about 25 minutes before the sound designer that they'd been working with for many years before he joined the call. Andre Gregory had his laptop set up in such a way that you could only see his forehead. And he didn't seem to understand that like what he saw on his screen is what we would see on our screens. So co-producer Sean and I were making pleasant conversation with his forehead because neither one of us dared to tell Andre Gregory that he should adjust his screen. When the sound designer came and said, Andre, we can't see you. Andre, we're looking at your hairline. Move the laptop until you can see your own face. Because he could do it. He'd been working with him for 25 years. Sure. Mm-hmm. Sean and I didn't dare tell him, But because these people were titans to us, so it was an extraordinary experience to get to work with them. We were very afraid that we wouldn't be able to give those shows the release that they deserved because of our very meager resources. But a big part of it is that for many years, we've had a wonderful publicist, Emily Owens, who's been our publicist going all the way back to our theater days. And she was able to get the theater press very excited about these shows and the possibility of them reaching a wider audience. And particularly, we got rave reviews in the New York Times and the New Yorker. And I think particularly gratifying to Wally with both of those reviews and some other reviews was the reconsideration of Grasses of a Thousand Colors, a play which was to some extent dismissed on its original run because I think a lot of the kind of like nightmarishly pornographic nature of a lot of it. I think a lot of people didn't understand what on earth he was doing with it. And I think a lot of the play has become much easier to understand in an era of, sort of like kind of miserable isolation and, sexuality sometimes being kind of refunneled into kind of this like this kind of like, a technological remove. And then, of course, the disease, the illness that pervades the whole society. I think there was a much greater feeling that he was onto something with Grasses of a Thousand Colors, and that it wasn't just simply like a series of like sexual fantasies or something like that, but that it was actually a play that was tapping into some subconscious dreamlike mirrors of some real currents in society. But it's one of those places, it's really, when it came out, I honestly was like, oh my God, everybody I know is going to just have nothing to do with me anymore once they get to listen to this. I was like, it's one of those shows that's very hard to explain why you think it's good. With Designated Mourner, you can say, well, it's got this real major relevance to the idea of the rise of fascism in a democratic society. We were literally on the phone with Wally discussing marketing strategies for the Designated Mourner on January 6, 2021, as my phone started lighting up with notifications about the insurrection. It was one of the most eerie things in my life. It was, it really felt like the Designated Mourner coming to life because it had the same feeling as in the play of you're focused on your own personal stuff, but then off at the periphery, increasingly unnerving stuff is moving closer and closer to the center. So it's a lot easier to sell people on why you should put up with the unpleasantness of the Designated Mourner. Grasses of a Thousand Colors is a much harder sell, but the fact that a lot of prominent critics reconsidered their earlier opinions of it, I think meant a great deal to Wally. Those reviews got us a lot of downloads, and those ended up being the most successful shows in our first run of Gideon Media projects.
Our sort of last question, to the extent that you can share, what is next for Mac Rogers and for Gideon Media?
Well, guys, to the extent I can share things, is definitely right. There's a big project that I was just that I didn't produce, but I was one of two co-writers on, that I'm hoping they're going to announce very soon, because they finally done all the stuff that they were going to do before announcing it. But it's a big horror project being produced by a very prominent company, but I can't say what it is. My guess is that they'll sort of target a kind of like October-ish release for it. It's an audio drama, produced a horror show that's produced by some prominent horror people. That's definitely the highest profile job I've had yet, and I'm excited to hear. But I wasn't a producer on it, so I haven't been involved in the actual production. But I'm excited to hear how it came out. With Gideon Media, we recently migrated all of our material to the Fable and Folly network, which has been doing some really wonderful work building the audiences of audio drama companies that are a similar size to Gideon Media. So we're basically looking to kind of grow our Give Me Away and our smaller shows with them. We're recording another theater adaptation of a stage play that Sean wrote called Almalem. That's sort of like it's sort of like what he calls it is like it's a backstager set during the life of Jesus of Nazareth, where it's basically it's about this guy who sort of knows how to publicize people in the New Testament era, and he's really heavily involved in trying to sell to the public the idea that John the Baptist is the Messiah as sort of a political angle for getting Rome out of Jerusalem, and then this guy Jesus shows up and sort of like throws his plans for a loop, and it's a lovely play. It is adapted very comfortably to audio, so we'll be releasing that later in the year. We're doing a lot of work for corporate clients. That it's also NDA'd, that I'm hoping we can announce once it goes out there. And then beyond that, I have a new script that I'm working on with an eye toward self-production. We might do that first, or we might consider doing the second season of Give Me Away first. I'm just not sure. It'll basically, be what my new script is much more horror inflected, which is something I've been wanting to do for a while. I've been listening to so much audio drama horror, but I've almost exclusively been writing science fiction. I've been really, really eager to kind of shift more into the horror direction. But the exact opportunity hadn't come up yet. So, a lot of it'll just depend on which actors we have access to, which resources we have access to, and then we'll start going into it. But we definitely plan to have a steady stream of original content coming out. It was a brutal lesson to learn that going away for 3 years would make everyone forget. It should be obvious, but for some reason we had to learn that lesson. We are never going to go away for 3 years again. And we're going to do everything we can to have regular content coming out. Both me as a writer producer, and then me as a writer for hire for other projects. The whole NDA thing is so preposterous. Nothing would change if I could. These aren't major Hollywood studio productions, Nothing would change if I talked about them, but I just can't yet. It always makes me feel like I'm trying to be self-important. Like, ooh, if only you knew. And I would really rather just say, these aren't national security secrets, but whatever.
That's what you'd like us to think.
Hopefully they will be announced soon.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation, Mac. This has been so lovely just to listen to and to ask you these questions.
I'm grateful to you all for having me.
Oh gosh, anytime. People can tune in next week to listen to some more of our Lancer campaign. But Mac, before you go, where can people find you on social media, and or is there anything else that you'd like to plug?
The best place to, I've sort of let all of my other social media fall fallow except for my Twitter, which is @MacWrites, MacWrites, because some dude who posts once a year has @MacRogers. Drives me nuts. I really wish I could have it because I could just have my name. But he honestly, if you look at his thing, he basically just puts "Happy New Year," and then the next year he does that again. So @MacWrites is the best place to find me on social media, and the best place to find my creative work is Gideon-media.com is the best place to find my creative work. When I'm making a show, we'll always be putting it up there, and it's where you can listen to. It's where you can find direct links for nearly all of my work.
Excellent, awesome. Thanks so much. Dungeons and Drama Nerds is produced by Todd Brian Backus, Percival Hornak, and Nicholas Orvis, and is mixed and edited by Anthony Sertel Dean. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram @DNDramaNerds. Check out our cast bios on our website, dungeonsanddramanerds.com. Leave us a rating and a review wherever you get your podcasts, and tune in next week for another episode of Dungeons and Drama Nerds.